Before I get into this video, I just want to start off by saying that I have the utmost respect for David Goggins and everything that he stands for. As a matter of fact, last year, 2024, I finally took the time to read his book, Can't Hurt Me, and it was one of the best books that I've ever read, and I'd highly recommend that you read it yourself because that is the book that got me into autobiographies, which is something that I still do to this day. I still read autobiographies every single day. That said, there is something that he said not only in his autobiography, but also in pretty much every interview of his that I have watched that I vehemently disagree with. And that is the notion that you should squeeze every ounce of potential out of yourself so that you don't regret anything at the end of your life. So that you can live a life where when you finally reach the other side, you don't transition with any regrets in your conscience. Now, first of all, let's unpack that. I don't have any fundamental issue with reaching your potential in life, with fulfilling your potential to the greatest possible capacity that you can. However, when it comes to not having any regrets in life, that is where I think that if improperly perceived, people can potentially find themselves off course in life from trying to follow that advice. A while back, I watched a podcast episode of Chris Williamson and Alex Ramosi. I don't remember which one it was, but it was a long video, probably 2 or 3 hours. And there was one statement from that podcast that has stuck with me to this day, that lives in my mind rent-free. And that is the idea that you cannot split test life. Now, first of all, what's a split test? If you don't know that business term, or if you're not too keen on what that means, basically, a split test is where you create two different versions of a website or a product, a headline, etc. And 50% of people see the first version and the other 50% of people see the second version. So let's say, for example, if I were going to create a website to sell you something, I would create two versions of the website, maybe with two different headlines or two different images, two different videos, whatever. I would change one thing about each of the websites, and 50% of people would see the first version, the other 50% of people would see the second version. Life doesn't work that way. In life, you don't get do-overs. You don't get to split test what happens if you walk this path instead of this path. For me to be doing what I'm doing right now, for me to get into life coaching, for me to have gotten this far on YouTube, I had to make a decision along my path that I was going to commit to this at the expense of the traditional beaten path. Going to college, getting a traditional education in a high-paying field, and then getting a high-paying job in that field. I had to forego that. I had to relinquish that in order to access the path that I'm walking right now. Because, listen, I'm not a religious person, and I've never read the Bible myself, but I believe there's a passage, or at least a statement in there somewhere, about being double-minded. Or maybe a more traditional way of saying that is that he who tries to chase two rabbits catches neither. You have to pick your path in life. And with you making that decision, you have to know without any semblance of doubt that you are going to miss out. You are going to miss out. I have missed out on a lot by not going to college and pursuing the traditional path. But had I pursued that path, had I gone to college, had I gotten a high-paying job, I would have missed out on all of this. In other words, because you are one person who can only pursue one path, one timeline, you are always going to miss out on something. And because you're always going to miss out on something, there is always going to be some degree of regret within you. Assuming that you have two viable options, there's always going to be some semblance of regret within you. And the reason why it's important to see things this way, especially if you're feeling lost in life and you don't know which direction to pick, is because a lot of times people struggle with analysis paralysis because they're trying to avoid the feeling of regret. They're trying to avoid getting to the end of their lives and feeling that feeling of missing out on something. I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done that. In reality, especially if you want to be very, very successful, you're going to have to sacrifice things in order to get to where you want to go. So let's say, for example, and I'm going to actually use an example from my own life, an indirect example, secondhand example, but my dad. My dad always tells me that he could have been a billionaire if he wanted to. Now, my dad's a very confident person, so when he says things like that, of course, I kind of just brush them off. Not to say that he couldn't have done it, but I'm a big believer that if you can do it, then you would do it. But as I've gotten older, I've started to see the other side of what he means by that. When he says that he could have been a billionaire, he's not saying that in the sense that he is simply capable of doing it and that's all there is to it. He's saying that in the sense that he consciously chose to prioritize other things over doing the work required to become a billionaire or to become exceedingly wealthy. Because something that I've realized is that even to get to where I'm at, and I'm definitely not wealthy, even to get to where I'm at, it takes a lot of sacrifice. I had to sacrifice a lot of things, including my younger self. I had to sacrifice aspects of my younger self and leave those aspects behind in order to get to where I am right now. And in my dad's case, he had to sacrifice the dream of being very, very rich and being able to buy all of these material things that he's not that infatuated with. But nevertheless, he sacrificed that path in order to prioritize family because he wanted to be there for me in a way that, not to put his business out there, but in a way that he didn't really have with his father. He didn't really have a father figure like that, so he wanted to be like that for me. He wanted to be there in my life and in my sister's life. And he was, and still is to this day. And I know he'll continue to be. I'm saying this to say that when he gets to the end of his life, hopefully in the very, very distant future, when he's on his deathbed, there might be a part of him that regrets, even if just deep in his subconscious mind, even if he would never admit it, there might be a part of him that at least questions what he could have done career-wise had he just prioritized that over prioritizing family. That's not to say that he would change the path that he's chosen, but I'm sure that that question lingers in his mind. And even to this day, I hear him talk about certain business ideas that he has, but he doesn't really pursue them because, again, that's just not his priority. On the flip side of that, let's say he had chosen to pursue wealth, I'm sure he would have gotten to the end of his life and wondered, what if he had prioritized his family more? And I'm sure that there are many wealthy people who get to the end of their lives and ask themselves that same question. What if I had been able to show up to my daughter's dance recital? What if I had been able to show up to my son's basketball games? I wonder what our relationship would have been like. Maybe they would be right here at my deathbed instead of trying to avoid me because they don't feel like they have a relationship with me. I hope this is making sense to you, but basically I'm saying all of this to say that you have to choose your regret in life. If you're feeling lost, if you don't know which direction to walk in, instead of thinking in terms of avoiding regret, think in terms of consciously choosing which regret you can stomach more. Because if you do that, then when you get to your deathbed, hopefully in the very distant future, when you're lying there on your deathbed and you know that you have days or even hours left in this life thing, you can be at peace knowing that the regrets that you have are the regrets that you chose.